Cause it's Friday, you ain't got no job, and you ain't got shit to do.
Hey, who's back there? Don't you know it's Friday? We gotta do a beer review. Give me that microphone.
It's Friday, Friday, gotta get down on Friday. Everybody's looking forward to the weekend.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Chad from beardedhops.com. I've got a Friday morning beer review this morning that features a beer that has everything to do with morning energy. It is the Point Brewing Whole Hog Espresso Stout. This is a limited release from Point Brewery. Point Brewery is over in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. I have not had this beer before. I've had a few Point beers. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the brewery itself on this particular Friday morning beer review than I would normally do. We'll talk about the beer for sure. Oh, man, I just had breakfast. But the brewery itself is super, super interesting. With that, let me get my glass here. Get my opener, courtesy of Three Sheeps Brewery. Thanks, guys. Let's crack this thing open, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. The cap has a hog on it. Since it's a whole hog series. There we go. Whole hog limited edition. Note the date, 1857. We'll come back to that in just a few minutes. Smells like coffee and espresso beans. How about that? Let me make sure I'm I don't want to be too immodest here. Just kidding. No. All right, this is going to be very, very dark in color and hopefully have a nice foamy head on it. A little bit of a foamy head, got about a half inch or so. Nice tightly packed bubbles. The head doesn't give a whole lot of aroma. Honestly, it smells like a milk stout after it's poured. Out of the bottle, I could smell the espresso beans. After the pour, it smells like a milk stout. Interesting. The sip lives up to the name. Espresso is really the primary flavor of this beer. It doesn't appear to be all that complex, which is cool. I like simple beers that have an excellent flavor. I mean, this one certainly does. It tastes like an espresso with a nice roasty finish. That's pretty much it. Come back to that in just a second to give the initial rating. Let that set on my palate just a little bit. It is very roasty coffee-ish on the finish as it settles down. The bottle is a traditional long neck brown bottle. Very simple label. Espresso stout beer aged on coffee beans. So the label is just two color, brown and white. Got the whole hog logo there. The coffee beans, I believe, come from Milwaukee. I don't know if there's another Milwaukee out there or not. Is there another Milwaukee? Somebody let me know right now. No? They're telling in my ear that there's no other Milwaukees. Thanks, production team. Valentine Coffee Roasters in Milwaukee, Wisconsin is where the beans come from. Super simple bottle. Not really much information on it. It says something on the bottom. It's in cursive. Handcrafted using a blend of supreme roasted malts, delicately aged on hand-picked espresso coffee beans, smooth and full on the palate with a roasted finish. You almost can't read that. It's in this cursive-y looking writing. It's tiny. I just got brand new glasses and it's super crisp. It's just really hard to read. No other information. Malts are roasted dark chocolate. Hops are Palisade hops. 6.4 ABV, 17 IBUs. Point Brewing. This brewery goes way, way back. I mean, that date on the cap that I showed you, 1857. Yeah, that's when Point Brewery got its start. Frank Wall and George Reuter established Stevens Point Brewery and brewed the first Point beer in 1857. Now, I think this is really interesting because Point Brewery is a big, big brewery in the craft beer world. There were some ownership changes that happened back in the early 2000s. And I'll get to that in a second. I want to quickly go through the history of Point Brewery because it's kind of local to me. They're about an hour and a half away from me. I haven't been there, but because they're Wisconsin-based and they're so large, a lot of you watching this, I'm sure have heard of Point Brewery. And because of that, I'm just going to run through their history on their website. Bear with me. 1857, Stevens Point Brewery is created. 1864, Point Brewery provides beer to the troops in the Civil War. 1920, Stevens Point Brewery produces near beer products and soft drinks during Prohibition, so they did not go out of business during Prohibition. 1930, Wisconsin is home to more than 80 breweries at that time. I had no idea that there were that many breweries in Wisconsin back in the early 20s and 30s, most of which go out of business after the Great Depression, which was 1929, of course. Stevens Point Brewery continues to thrive. 1950, can production begins. 1972, Phil Shabisky began his career at Stevens Point Brewery in 1933. Phil became the general manager of Stevens Point Brewery in 1942. 1974, Phil became the chairman of the board, and he passed away in 1986. Back in 1972, Kenneth Shabilsky, I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong, Shabilsky became the assistant general manager to the company. End of 1974, Shabilskys were able to claim a larger production while they followed time-honored but efficient small brewery methods. Ken became the general manager in 1986 after Phil passed away. Continued to work with the brewery until 1995. 1973, Point is rated the #1 American beer in taste tests as reported by some reporter in the Chicago Daily News. 1990, they're growing enough to the point where they start distribution outside of the state of Wisconsin for the first time. They're selling their Point Special Lager outside of Wisconsin for the first time in 133 years. 1992, this is when the brewery takes a little bit of a crooked turn, but they come back. 1992, they're purchased by Barton Beers in Chicago, Illinois. Barton Beers I'm not sure if Barton's still in business or who owns who now, but back then, Barton owned Corona. So, Point Brewery is wrapped into this portfolio of big beer. They do get a couple of expansions in the mid-90s where they were able to add some barrels in a larger warehouse. Coming back to Wisconsin in 2002, Barton Beers sold Point Brewery because they were kind of a distraction to the overall portfolio of Barton Beers. In 2002, they introduced their soda line, root beer, all very good stuff. Here's a big one. 2003, Point Special Lager wins the gold medal at the Great American Beer Festival over Miller Genuine Draft and Budweiser. And at that point is when Point received some major national recognition, and things just exploded from there. In 2004, they expanded the distribution to 10 states, so they're well outside of Wisconsin. 2005, gourmet soda brands are started. Lots of money is beginning to get invested in the brewery in the mid to late first decade of the 2000s. 2007, Point Brewery is 150 years old. 2008, seasonal beers begin. 2009, Whole Hog begins, which is when this is a series of. 2010, more expansion. Capacity is more than 80,000 barrels in 2010. Distribution grows to 25 states. 2011, again, another expansion. Capacity is increased to nearly 100,000 barrels. 2012, Cider Boys. Y'all heard of Cider Boys, right? I think it's a fairly well-known, pretty close to national brand at this point. Cider Boys hard ciders. They're increasing their workforce. 120,000 barrels in 2012. They're investing millions and millions of dollars. 2013, another $2 million expansion. Adds a second brew kettle, 16 more unit tanks. Capacity is now 150,000 barrels. 2014, more expansion, 1,000 new kegs, 10 new jobs. 2015, 1.5 million more in can filler and new tanks, 3 more jobs. There's a new bar, Point Burger Bar, that's opened in Milwaukee in 2015. I wanted to bring all that up because it's a really, really impressive story. For these guys to be that old and never close their doors. Yes, they did sell to a larger brand for a brief while. It's back in Wisconsin, privately owned, independent brewery, producing 170,000 barrels a year, something like that. It's a large brewery for a craft brewery. The craft brew world is anything below 6 million barrels. So on that scale, they're still small. Point is just a really, really impressive brewery, in my opinion. I think it's probably one of the better success stories as far as Wisconsin breweries go, Wisconsin businesses go. Really cool stuff. And I apologize if it did take a little bit too long to explain all that. I just think it's awesome. They're still around and doing what they're doing. Point makes one of our favorites, James Page Brewing, Casper White Stout. Awesome beer. Got it in my fridge right now. I always try to have a 6 or 10 or something like that in my refrigerator at all times. That and Maui Bikini Lager are the two, my two go-to beers when I don't want to drink, something a little more flavor pointed, I guess. The JP Brewing Casper, love it. Where am I going to put this one? If I rate this relative to other Friday morning beers that I reviewed, this one's going to be middle of the road. It's really good. It's got an excellent coffee flavor. It might be a little bit too coffee flavored, but I kind of expect that being named an espresso stout. I'm not counting that against it. It's really good. I would certainly buy it again. I would certainly drink it again. So that puts it a 3 or above immediately. It's a good morning beer. So I don't know that I would drink it in the middle of the day or early evening. Maybe late at night would be a good time for this one, but I'm going to give it a pretty good initial rating here. I'm going to go 3.5 on this. It's a simple flavor profile, easy drinking. It tastes like cold coffee with some chocolate flavor. It's excellent. 3.5. Real quick, let's check out Untapped and Beer Advocate to see where the rest of the world sits. Added to Untapped in September of 2014. However, the beer's been around since 2009. 10,196 total, 8,687 unique. It has a 3.76 average rating there on Untapped. Beer Advocate shows 116 check-ins and ratings with an average of 3.8. This is another one I'm pretty close to being in line with. Good stuff. Great beer point. I hope that we can get over and visit you guys soon, because I would love to do a brewery tour and sample some more of your beers. And Brittany would love to go with me too, because she loves Cider Boys. In fact, the whole second shelf of our refrigerator is filled with nothing but Cider Boys. That's her alcohol shelf. So she's got the whole gamut of Cider Boys flavors in the refrigerator. Cheers to you, Point. Everybody have a great weekend. Happy Friday. Go check out one of these. I'm sure they're available in many, many places because their distribution is quite good. Happy Friday. Happy chat. You can go.